Federal prosecutors say a notorious Cincinnati landlord sexually harassed women who rented his apartments.
And the violations and fines for John Klosterman's properties are racking up. Now the city of Cincinnati is suing him. Chief investigative reporter Craig Cheatham went to get some answers from the landlord himself under fire.
We finally spotted his blue pickup. It looked like the I-Team had caught up with John Klosterman. Klosterman's critics wonder when he will finally have his day of reckoning. For nearly 20 years, City of Cincinnati building inspectors have cited Klosterman for the rundown and even dangerous condition of his buildings.
Mr. Klosterman is a slumlord in my book.
Dale Huddleston says he rented an apartment from Klosterman for a year.
He does not care about any of his tenants. All he cares about pretty much is himself and his money. That's all he cares about.
We tried to reach Klosterman at his business address and on the phone.
The wireless customer you called is not available at this time.
But even Klosterman's painter, Jimmy Smith, said he didn't know how to reach him. Is that the old number?
Yeah, that's it. That's the old one.
Just a few minutes after that, we saw Klosterman, and that quickly he was gone. The city of Cincinnati says these are just a few of about 70 properties owned or controlled by John Klosterman. Almost all of them are in the small Cincinnati neighborhood of Sedamsville. Considering Klosterman's long history with city building inspectors, the I-Team wanted to know how he was able to control so many buildings that look like this for so long.
I ain't seen him at all today.
Klosterman employee Jimmy Smith says his boss is trying to fix up the buildings. You think he's getting a bum rap?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
The I-Team's investigation found that in some cases, city inspectors repeatedly documented dangerous conditions, and the city fined Klosterman thousands of dollars, even forcing him to demolish buildings. But the city didn't provide records showing he'd been fined for other properties that city inspectors also described as dangerous. Stephanie Soward's house is surrounded by Klosterman's buildings. You think the city's done enough over the years to hold him accountable for these properties?
I don't think they've done enough because he's still out. He's still letting his properties go to shit.
The waste is evident on the 129-year-old Lady of Perpetual Help Church, a building in desperate need of perpetual help. Klosterman bought it in 2004. 5 years later, the city declared the church an unsafe public nuisance and targeted it for demolition. Historic preservationists raised support to protect it. City taxpayers paid about $200,000 to make the building stable. Klosterman still owns it. It's unclear if he's required to repay taxpayers.
He don't care. All he's worried about is the almighty dollar.
Klosterman's critics say he should be worried. In July of last year, the city of Cincinnati sued Klosterman, his wife Sue, and companies allegedly connected to them for almost $579,000 in unpaid taxes, fees, and fines. The suit documented a long history of violations, including cases where Klosterman allegedly rented condemned buildings, then evicted the tenants and sued them for rent. John Klosterman's alleged misconduct with female tenants also prompted federal prosecutors to file a civil complaint against the Klostermans for violating the Fair Housing Act. Prosecutors say John offered to let female tenants live rent-free if they had sex with him. The complaint says Klosterman evicted or threatened to evict women who refused his advances. Federal prosecutors are pursuing damages for the women and fines against the Klostermans.
Housing discrimination is still a huge problem in our community.
Nick DiNardo is the managing attorney for housing and consumer cases at Legal Aid Society of Greater Cincinnati. Legal Aid has represented some of Klosterman's tenants.
He takes advantage of the most vulnerable tenants. He's an extreme example, but we see this a lot.
DiNardo says Cincinnati needs 40,000 more low-income housing units to meet the needs of people who are the most likely to rent apartments that are in poor condition, just to have a place to live.
There isn't enough decent housing for them. So we have a real crisis in the city right now.
DiNardo says the city is a leader in efforts to support vulnerable tenants, but the challenge can still feel overwhelming.
We only have so many building inspectors. We only have so many legal aid attorneys. And so we try and prioritize our work for the most important cases. I think that's why someone like Klosterman is in trouble right now, because he was one of the largest offenders.
And that's why the I-Team kept going until we finally had the chance to confront John Klosterman face to face. Mr. Klosterman, Craig Cheatham with Channel 9 would like to ask you some questions.
No, thank you.
Why don't you just talk with us about the allegations against you?
I don't want to speak to you.
Well,
because it's a negative conversation, and I won't have it.
The landlord who spends so much time in Sedamsville couldn't get out fast enough. Sir, we just want to talk with you about the cases against you.
It's a sad situation. It's a really sad situation for a lot of people in this community.
Klosterman's attorney did not respond to several requests for comment. The I-Team also made repeated requests for an interview with Cincinnati Mayor John Cranley. He did not make himself available. Art Dahlberg, the director of the Department of Buildings and Inspections for the city, also declined to be interviewed because the city is suing Klosterman.